The air on the tarmac was different. Not the dry, suffocating heat of Kandahar, but the damp, sweet chill of an early autumn in Ohio. It was the smell of home. For 18 months, I had carried a single image in my mind, the tearful, joyous reunion with my family. I had pictured my wife, Sarah, running into my arms, my son Billy, now 7, clinging to my leg, and my daughter Lily, just 5, holding her arms up for me to lift her. That image was a fortress in my mind, a place I retreated to during the long, terrifying nights of my third deployment. Walking through the airport, I felt like a ghost. I saw families reuniting, soldiers embracing their spouses and children, and the sight sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated hope through me. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I saw them waiting by the baggage claim. My father-in-law, a stoic man named Richard, my mother-in-law, Carol, and Sarah, holding a sign that read, "Welcome home, hero." But the image in my mind didn't match the scene in front of me. Sarah was not running. Her smile was tight, a brittle, unfamiliar thing. She didn't meet my eyes. The in-laws were just as distant. My kids? They were nowhere to be found. A wave of confusion, cold and sharp, washed over me. This was wrong. This was not the reunion I had been fighting for. The car ride home was a silent, agonizing torture. My kids were with my mother-in-law, Carol, in her car behind us. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. I tried to talk, to ask about the house, about her, about the kids. "How have you all been?" I asked, my voice a little too loud in the suffocating quiet. "We've been fine," she said, her voice flat, her tone a wall. "The kids are fine." "Why didn't they come with you?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like a storm cloud. She didn't answer. She just changed the subject to a neighbor's new fence. The conversation was stilted, painful. I tried to reach for her hand, but she pulled it away, feigning an interest in her phone. My mind, trained to identify threats and anomalies, was screaming. This was not the woman I had said goodbye to. When we pulled into the driveway, my in-laws were already there. The kids were standing on the porch, but they weren't running to me. They were standing behind Carol, their small faces a mask of fear and confusion. I dropped my bags and walked toward them, my heart a desperate plea. "Billy! Lily!" I knelt down, my arms wide open. Lily, my sweet Lily who used to jump into my arms, took a step back. Billy, my son, my little hero, looked at me with a silent, stony expression. I tried to hug them, but they just stood there, their bodies rigid, their eyes averted. It was like I was a stranger, a monster they had been told to avoid. The house felt like a museum. Nothing was out of place, but nothing felt lived in. I tried to connect with the kids. I sat on the floor with Billy, trying to build a Lego car with him. "Remember when we built the giant spaceship?" I asked, trying to find a flicker of the old him. He didn't answer. He just kept stacking the blocks, his eyes on the floor. I tried to read Lily a bedtime story, but she wouldn't let me hold her. She just sat in the corner of her bed, her small body curled into a ball, and watched me with a silent, wary gaze. Later that night, after they were finally asleep, I tried to talk to Sarah. She was already in bed, her back to me. "What's going on, Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are the kids acting like this?" She turned to face me, her eyes filled with a cold, simmering resentment. "You've been gone for a year and a half, Mark. What did you expect? You think you can just walk back in here and everything will be the same? You think your kids are just going to forget you were gone?" The words were a brutal gut punch. I wanted to tell her I had a reason, a duty, a mission. But I could see it was useless. She was right, in a way. I had been gone. But her tone, her complete lack of empathy, felt wrong. Something was terribly wrong. I got up to get a glass of water, and that's when I noticed the new TV, a massive, expensive-looking flat screen that I knew we couldn't have afforded before I left. I saw a new PlayStation, a new set of golf clubs for Richard. There were new, expensive things everywhere. A terrible, gnawing suspicion began to form. My mind, still on high alert from my years in combat, began to put the pieces together. The new TV. The kids' new clothes. The expensive golf clubs for my father-in-law. My military salary, even with the combat pay, was not enough to fund this lifestyle. My blood ran cold as I walked over to my desk and pulled up my bank accounts. I logged into our joint checking account. It was practically empty. There were some small transactions, grocery trips, and gas, but the bulk of the money was gone. I felt a rising sense of panic. Where had it all gone? I knew I had a separate savings account, a rainy day fund that only I had access to. I logged in, my hands shaking. The account was gone. It had been closed and the balance transferred out. A total of $60,000 gone. I confronted Sarah, my voice shaking with a rage that was barely contained. "Where is the money, Sarah?" I asked, holding up my phone. "Where is all of our money?" She looked at my phone, then at me, her face impassive. "I took care of it," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "We needed it to get by. You were gone, Mark. I had to pay the bills." "The bills?" I asked, gesturing wildly around the room. "The new TV? The golf clubs? The new furniture? You drained all of our accounts. Every single cent." She shrugged, a cool, careless gesture that felt like a slap in the face. "I had to take care of us," she repeated, the lie a comfortable mask. "I had to do what was best for the kids." It was then, in that moment of cold, brutal realization, that I knew she wasn't just a stranger. She was an enemy. My mind was a blur of anger and disbelief. I had confronted Sarah again, my voice loud, my frustration boiling over. "You're a liar, Sarah," I yelled. "You've stolen from me. You've stolen from our family." She didn't fight back. She didn't yell. She just looked at me with a cold, placid expression. "You're scaring me, Mark," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "You're frightening the children." I stopped dead in my tracks. I looked at the kids, who had heard the shouting from the other room. They were standing in the hallway, their eyes wide with fear. She had orchestrated this. She had baited me, pushed me, until I had lost control. And she was using it against me. "I'm not going to hurt anyone," I said, my voice dropping. "I just want to know where our money is." But it was too late. She had her phone in her hand, her thumb hovering over the numbers. "I'm calling the police," she said, her voice trembling with a faint terror. "He's being violent. He's threatening me." I was stunned. The police arrived within minutes. Sarah was sobbing, her story a well-rehearsed performance. "He came back from Afghanistan and he's not the same," she told them, her voice filled with fake tears. "He's unstable. He's threatening me and the kids." She showed them a picture of a bruise on her arm, a bruise I had never seen before, a bruise that had been planted there, a piece of fabricated evidence. She even had a story about an old argument we had had before I left, twisted and manipulated into a supposed threat. I tried to explain, to tell them about the money, about the kids. But it was useless. They saw a hysterical woman and a soldier who had just returned from war, a man who was, in their eyes, an unstable threat. I was forced to leave my own home, a man broken and bewildered, with nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of a lie hanging over my head. The days that followed were a surreal, heartbreaking blur. I was officially a homeless man. The police, acting on Sarah's false claims of violence and instability, had given me a restraining order. I was forbidden from contacting her or the children. I tried to call, but my number was blocked. I went to the house, but the police were called, and I was told to stay away. I was living out of my car, a man who had fought for his country, now living like a ghost in his own city. The money, the lies, the restraining order, it all felt like a well-oiled machine, a plan that had been in motion for months. My in-laws, Richard and Carol, were in on it. They had helped Sarah manipulate the finances and had been feeding her the lies to turn the kids against me. They had always been a little cold, a little distant, but I never in a million years would have thought they were capable of such a calculated, brutal betrayal. The cold was the worst part. Not the physical cold of the car, but the emotional cold of being without my children. I would sit for hours outside the park where I knew they would play, just to catch a glimpse of their small, beautiful faces. I saw them with Sarah, with Richard and Carol, their faces still and withdrawn, their smiles gone. I wanted to run to them, to tell them I was here, that I loved them, that their mother was lying. But I couldn't. I was a broken man, a shattered shadow of the person I used to be, and I felt utterly defeated. I had come home from a war, only to find myself on a new, far more painful battlefield. My low point was a cold, rainy night. I was huddled under a blanket in my car, my stomach rumbling, my mind a chaotic mess of self-pity and despair. I was a man who had been trained to fight, to survive, to overcome. But this was a different kind of fight. This was a fight against lies and betrayal, a fight I felt completely unprepared for. The next morning, I walked to a local soup kitchen, a place I had only ever seen from the outside. I was a veteran, I was an American, and I was utterly, shamefully broken. I stood in line with 100 other people, my head down, my shame a palpable weight on my shoulders. A man in front of me, an older veteran with a weathered face and a kind, tired smile, turned to me. "Rough night, soldier?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak. He introduced himself as Jack. He had served in Vietnam and had seen more than his fair share of struggles, both on the battlefield and at home. He listened to my story with a patient, non-judgmental grace. He listened to the whole thing, the deployment, the reunion, the lies, the restraining order, the financial betrayal. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer advice. He just listened. When I was done, he looked at me, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "You're not the first," he said quietly. "It happens. Not just to soldiers, but to good men everywhere. But you're a veteran. You don't have to fight this alone." He told me about a support network he had founded, a group of veterans who helped each other, not with money, but with resources. He gave me a card, a simple piece of paper with a name and a number. "Call this woman," he said. "Her name is Eleanor Vance. She'll know what to do." My despair, my shame, my hopelessness, they were still there, but now, for the first time, there was a small, flickering flame of hope. The woman Jack had told me about, Eleanor Vance, was nothing like I had expected. She was a no-nonsense lawyer with a steely gaze and a reputation for being a bulldog in the courtroom. She was also a Marine veteran, a fact she wore like a badge of honor. She met me in a small, cluttered office, the walls lined with legal books and military memorabilia. I told her my story again, but this time, I had a witness. Jack had vouched for me, had told her I was a good man, a good father, and a good soldier. Eleanor listened with a professional, unflinching focus. When I was done, she didn't offer pity. She offered a plan. "This is a classic case of parental alienation and financial fraud," she said, her voice a low, confident growl. "Your wife and in-laws have systematically worked to turn your children against you and steal your assets. We have to fight back, and we have to fight smart." She explained the strategy. The first step was to establish my innocence. We would get the financial records. We would get my phone records. We would get a full, psychological evaluation from a certified professional. We would build a mountain of evidence that would prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was not a monster, that I was a good man who had been deliberately, maliciously framed. The second step was to expose Sarah's lies. We would show the judge her pattern of deceit, her financial theft, and her emotional manipulation of the children. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of purpose. I was a soldier again, but this time, the battlefield was the courtroom, and my mission was not to fight for a country, but to fight for my children, for my family, and for the truth. Eleanor was a master strategist. She explained the concept of parental alienation to me, a term I had never heard before. They're poisoning the kids against you, Mark, she said, her voice full of a raw, empathetic rage. They're telling them you're a bad man, that you didn't want to come home, that you left them. They're making them feel like they're betraying them by loving you. The explanation hit me like a revelation. I thought back to the kids with drawn faces, the way they had flinched when I tried to hug them, the vacant, haunted look in their eyes. It wasn't just a result of my absence, it was a result of a deliberate, malicious campaign of emotional abuse. The realization was a heavy, painful weight. Eleanor and her team went to work. They pulled every financial record. They found the paper trail of the $60,000, a trail that led directly to Sarah and her parents. They found phone records showing a barrage of calls between Sarah, her mother, and her father in the months leading up to my return. They found a series of emails to family friends, a narrative of me being an unstable, violent man who was not fit to be a father. She had painted me as a monster long before I had even set foot on American soil. The evidence they were gathering was overwhelming, a digital fingerprint of a calculated, cruel betrayal. The more they found, the more my rage turned into a cold, focused determination. I was no longer a victim. I was a soldier on a mission, and my mission was to expose the lies, to dismantle the fortress of deceit they had built around my children, and to get my family back. I was going to fight, not with my fists or with my voice, but with the cold, hard, unassailable truth. The first custody hearing was a brutal, dehumanizing experience. The courtroom was a sterile, unforgiving place, and I felt like a criminal on trial. Sarah's lawyer, a slick, professional man with a condescending smirk, painted a picture of me that was utterly unrecognizable. He used her fabricated evidence, her tearful testimony, and her false claims of domestic violence to portray me as an unstable, dangerous soldier who had come back from war a broken man. Your Honor, he said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, my client and her children are in grave danger. This man is a threat to their safety and well-being. I sat there, my hands clasped, my jaw clenched. I wanted to scream, to stand up and tell them all the truth. But Eleanor had coached me. She had told me to stay calm, to stay silent, to let her do the talking. And she did. When it was her turn, Eleanor stood up, a force of nature in a simple black suit. She didn't yell. She didn't make emotional pleas. She just presented the facts. She showed the judge the financial records, the paper trail of the stolen money, the evidence of Sarah's premeditated financial fraud. She showed the judge the fabricated evidence, the picture of the bruise on Sarah's arm, and she showed the judge that the date on the picture was a week after I had been forced out of the house. She systematically, meticulously, and without a single misstep, dismantled Sarah's entire narrative. The judge, a wise, old man with a tired expression, was watching, his interest piqued. The smirk on Sarah's lawyer's face began to fade, and a look of dawning horror began to creep across Sarah's own features. The fortress of lies she had built was beginning to crack. The custody hearing was adjourned, but the fight was far from over. Eleanor and her team continued to dig, and what they found was a new level of betrayal. The paper trail of my $60,000 didn't just lead to Sarah, it led to her father, Richard. He was a seemingly respectable man, a retired accountant who had always been a little too proud of his reputation. The evidence was undeniable. He had been the one to help Sarah close my separate savings account. He had forged my signature, a small, subtle forgery that Eleanor's team of forensics experts were able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. The money hadn't just been stolen, it had been meticulously, professionally laundered through a series of shell accounts and offshore transactions. The in-laws weren't just passively supporting Sarah's narrative, they were active, willing accomplices in a calculated scheme of theft and emotional abuse. The realization was a punch to the gut. Richard, a man I had always respected, a man I had looked to for guidance, was an architect of my own destruction. The lie ran deeper, the betrayal wider, than I could have ever imagined. Eleanor was furious. This wasn't just a messy divorce anymore, this was a conspiracy. She filed a new motion, and the charges against Sarah and Richard went from civil to criminal. The kids, my innocent children, were caught in the middle of a war I was now fighting not just for their love, but for their very sanity. The next step was the most difficult. The court ordered a psychological evaluation for Billy and Lily. A therapist, a woman specializing in cases of parental alienation, was brought in to speak with them. Eleanor explained that the purpose wasn't to grill the children or force them to choose a side, but to gently, carefully, and slowly deprogram them from the lies they had been fed. The therapist's report was heartbreaking. Billy had been told I was a violent monster who didn't want to come home. He had been told I was fighting a war because I hated them, because I wanted to be away from them. Lily, my sweet Lily, had been told I had left them and that I didn't love them anymore. They had been told so many lies for so long that they had internalized the narrative, and they saw me not as their father, but as a source of pain and fear. The therapist, however, had also seen through the lies. She noted their withdrawn behavior, their fear of expressing their own feelings, their lack of genuine joy. She noted the signs of emotional abuse, the careful, stilted way they spoke about their mother and her parents. Her report was a professional, unassailable piece of evidence, and it was a direct refutation of everything Sarah had claimed. The judge, a good and wise man, saw the truth for what it was, and the tide began to turn. The final custody hearing was the culmination of months of pain, of fighting, of digging for the truth. It was a courtroom packed with our respective lawyers, the judge, and a mountain of evidence. Eleanor was magnificent. She presented the financial records, the forged signatures, the phone records, the psychological report from the therapist. She painted a picture of a manipulative, desperate woman and her accomplice, a man who had used his own family as a weapon. Sarah's lawyer, who had once been so confident, was now a rattled, broken man. He had no defense. The lies had been exposed. The narrative had been dismantled. When the judge finally looked at Sarah, he didn't see a victim. He saw a conspirator, a woman who had used her own children as pawns in a sick, calculated game of greed and deceit. He granted me full custody. He ordered Sarah and her parents to pay back every single cent they had stolen, plus damages. He ordered them to attend court-mandated counseling and to stay away from the children until a therapist deemed it safe for them to have supervised visits. When the gavel came down, the sound was a final, definitive declaration of a war that had finally been won. Sarah's composure broke, and she began to scream, her true face, a mask of unbridled rage and self-pity, finally revealed for all the world to see. The first few weeks with the kids were hard. The home, a small, quiet apartment that I had found with the help of the Veterans Network, was not a perfect place. But it was safe. The kids were distant, cautious, their smiles a rare, precious thing. I was a man who had fought in a war, a man who had come back to a shattered life, and now, I was a single father, trying to navigate a new kind of battlefield. But I was not alone. Jack and Eleanor were there, a constant source of support and guidance. We started with small things. We went to the park. We went to the zoo. We started building the Lego car I had tried to build with Billy on that first, terrible night. The first time Billy laughed, a real, unforced laugh, it was like the sun had come out. The first time Lily, my sweet Lily, reached up and gave me a hug, a genuine hug that was not a product of fear or manipulation, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a year and a half. The healing was slow, a painstaking, day-by-day process. But it was happening. We were a family again, not a perfect family, but a family that was trying, a family that was fighting, a family that was healing. A few years later, my life is unrecognizable. My kids are happy, well-adjusted, and thriving. We are a team, a family forged in fire. Sarah and her parents are a distant memory, a cautionary tale of a lie that almost destroyed us. I have my life back, my children back, and my dignity back. The war is over, but the fight is not. I started a nonprofit with Eleanor and Jack, a place for veterans who are facing similar struggles. We provide legal aid, psychological counseling, and a support network for soldiers who have come home from a war only to find themselves on a new, far more painful battlefield. My mission is no longer on a foreign land, but right here at home, fighting for justice, for truth, and for the families that have been torn apart by lies and betrayal. My story is not just a story of a soldier who came home to a shattered life. It's a story of a father who fought for his children, a man who found a new mission, and a family that, against all odds, found a way to heal and to love again.